Hello, everyone. We are live on stage. Thank you all for joining. It's good to see you. Dirk, how are you today?
I'm good. Very much looking forward to this.
Me too. And
We have a
I
bunch of
suppose this is
people
your
coming in.
last event for today, right?
It is. Well, it's 5 p.m. over here, so I'm very happy for this to be the last on the list for today.
I can relate. Perfect. How's the weather in Germany?
Still sunny, so I'm hoping that maybe I have some daylight left after the webinar, but I don't know. Can't be too sure that that's going to happen.
I hope it will be. I hope you will find some time to go for a walk.
Yeah, that would be the plan.
Hello, everyone. Please join us. I see more people joining, so we will give it another minute. We have a full house today, judging from the number of registrants. So we will give it a few more moments, and then we'll start. All right, I would say we are ready to go. Perfect. So again, officially, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Streamlining Software Localization for Global Impact with Transifex and Hubspot. My name is Jacob Dulkeridis, and I'm a Customer Success Manager here at Transifex. So thank you all for joining us. Today, we've got an exciting session lined up. I'm joined by Dirk Runes, Senior Manager, Product Localization and Systems at Hubspot. Dirk will walk us through HubSpot's software localization journey and how they've scaled their global content strategy using Transifex. The concept behind this webinar is to share real-world insights on continuous localization, scalability, and how leveraging the right tools can help your team optimize global content delivery. We will also touch on the role AI is starting to play in localization and what that means for the future. So, super exciting stuff overall. I hope you all agree. Just a couple of quick notes before we dive in. This session is obviously being recorded, so if you miss anything or want to rewatch, we'll send the recording to all registrants afterward. We will also have a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to drop your questions in the relevant Q&A field throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible at the end. So now I will pass it over to Dirk, who is going to give us an inside look at how HubSpot has managed to streamline the localization efforts and their approach to scaling globally. So take it away, Dirk.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see you here. So in my slides, I'm going to talk you through the product localization process at HubSpot. First off, I'm going to start up with a little bit of background on the company for those of you that don't know us. HubSpot is a globally operating software as a service company founded in 2005, headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Our primary product of the same name, also called Hubspot, is a free-to-use customer platform with a CRM system at its core that businesses can use to run their website, their marketing, their sales, their services, operations, and so on. In fact, most of HubSpot's own business operations run on our own platform. On top of that, there's then a couple of free and premium products for specific needs around marketing, around sales, that customers can use to enhance the capabilities and take advantage of additional features for those particular areas. These days, we have around 230-ish thousand customers, not quite yet, but we're getting there, across over 100 countries. And we have an extensive partner ecosystem, both on the product side for app integrations, but also on the marketing and sales side, where our customers can work with our partners to make sure that they're leveraging HubSpot to the best of their capabilities, or even have our partners do the work in HubSpot for them. HubSpot has always positioned itself as a thought leader in the industry. Our founders pioneered the so-called inbound methodology, which is a customer-centric consultative approach to marketing and sales that has been conceptualized as the HubSpot flywheel, which is the graphic that you see on the slide here. We're not going to get into the details of the inbound methodology today. That would be beyond the scope of this presentation. But if you're interested in learning more about that, then I would recommend that you visit our website, where you can definitely find a lot more details on this. HubSpot itself uses the inbound methodology for its own operations, and this means that traditionally we have had a pretty strong focus on content marketing across a broad spectrum of content, be that blog posts, ebooks, webinars, e-learning materials, and so on and so on. And that, for the longest time, has also sort of dictated the approach that we took to localization, and has dictated the priorities that we have in localization. Localization at HubSpot is a centralized function, a centralized team of around 30-ish people, and as just mentioned, like traditionally very much focused on the marketing side of things, or the sort of flywheel teams, which is marketing, sales, and customer success. The majority of our team members are either localization specialists or project managers, which is, I guess, what you would expect from an internal localization team at a company. But we do have some specialized positions, for example, for DTP, or my own role, for example, focused on localization tech. Not everything that we handle is done in-house. We try to keep as much of our localization efforts in-house as possible to leverage the internal capacity that we have. But we do also work with external vendors and freelancers, especially, for example, for product localization, what we're going to be talking about today. We do this pretty extensively. In regards to the languages that we work with, we have sort of 3 different tiers of languages that kind of differ in the amount of content and that is being localized into those languages, as well as the priority. We have 6 core languages. Those are the languages that we support across our entire business operations, across website, obviously the software itself, support documentation, developer documentation, and so on. And those are also the languages for which we tend to have internal resources. Then we have some non-core languages, which are languages where our language offerings are limited to our software and the support documentation. And then a set of long-tail languages that we call end-user languages, for which we only provide a very limited scope of translated content, mostly focused on content that allows our customers to converse with their clients in their chosen language. So if, for example, a business wants to run a Vietnamese language website on HubSpot, build Vietnamese forms, build meeting links in Vietnamese, we want to be able to provide all of the necessary tools for our customer to be able to do that. One area that I kind of want to highlight where localization at HubSpot is a little bit different, and we will see this as sort of a running theme throughout the rest of the presentation, is the number of tools and processes and systems that we have to interact with, which tends to be rather high at HubSpot. This is kind of down to the fact that at HubSpot, we tend to build our own tooling. And that can have the effect that there are a lot of different tools flying around that we as the localization team have to interface with, whether that's for integration purposes or because we're end users of the tools. There's quite the selection there. And this also requires us to invest a fair bit into custom development and to kind of create sort of unofficial sub-specializations on our team, just because not everyone can be intricately familiar with each individual stakeholder group or process or tool that we have to interface with. All right, if we move to the next slide. Moving into the topic of product localization, I kind of first want to give a little bit of context of like how HubSpot approaches product development and how our approach to product development has in turn shaped the setup for our product localization. And then later on, we're gonna talk about what implication that has for the people who are working on the actual localization piece. So first things first, HubSpot is very much a product-led organization, right? Like HubSpot comes out of the startup culture, the startup approach to product development, where product comes first, which means we have a very strong focus on autonomous team in our product organization. We have a strong focus on fast iteration, on continuous deployment. And that means that changes to our software go live and are deployed into production dozens of times a day. And all of those changes, all of those deployments can, of course, also include localized content. And that can make it quite tricky for us in localization to make sure that we can keep up. Across our product org, there are literally hundreds of individual contributors and dozens of teams that can create content that finds its way to us, which can sometimes make it quite difficult for us to kind of anticipate what is coming. The product localization process that is in place at Hubspot has very much been designed with our product development and our product teams in mind. It is first and foremost a centrally managed infrastructure service. We'll see more on that in a second, and is very much designed to be as plug and play as possible, right? Like the whole idea is that it needs to be as easy as possible for product teams to interface with the localization process. Localization and internationalization are, of course, requirements that product teams have to adhere to, but ideally they should never be a burden. This does have the effect that the sort of localization process becomes a bit of a black box for product teams at times. Now, that is like without any sort of negative connotations. It's not like we're gatekeeping information or we're preventing them from diving deep into the topic of product localization and learning everything about the product localization that they want to, the product localization process that they want to learn. But we don't require it of them, which, you know, the idea, again, being that we want to keep the overhead that localization produces for product teams, we want to keep that overhead to a minimum. Our idea is that we are a service provider, and our goal is to take as much of that off their plates as possible. We move to the next slide. So right, on this slide, I do want to try to visualize the product localization process a little bit. At its core, there is a centralized localization database, which we call Linguini internally. This is sort of our source of truth for all of our in-app copy. You can kind of think of it like a centralized translation memory, although I will point out that it is not formatted as a TM. And this is sort of the core piece of the aforementioned infrastructure service. The main reason that we have this is, one, simply for centralization and standardization purposes. As I just mentioned, right, like our goal is to make things as easy as possible for our product teams, and I guess also for ourselves, in the sense that we wouldn't want to have like a bunch of different processes running in parallel. We want to funnel that through the same workflow as much as possible. The other big reason for having this is that we have a whole bunch of different content sources and origin systems where source content lives. And we need to, of course, be able to connect this to the product localization process. The vast majority of our content is stored on GitHub. That's around 80% of our in-app content. And for that, the use case is very, very simple. As content is being added or updated, we have standardized translation files that teams are required to use. And as we detect updates to any of these translation files, we simply pull this updated content into the centralized into the central database. For other content sources that we have, this can be SQL databases. These can be completely customized infrastructure pieces, depending on the given, the needs and requirements of the individual product teams that are working on it. So, for example, our notifications team that manages all of the notifications that we need to send in the HubSpot ecosystem to our customers. They work on a completely custom infrastructure, and for those teams, they too connect to the central database. But for those cases, it's typically up to the individual product teams to design how content is being uploaded into the central database. It's not so much a we go in and grab the content, but they let us know when content is there and add it to the database. So next up, we're going to have a very short video where I try my best to demonstrate this this process. At least, hopefully, it will be visible quite well. We can go into the video. There we go. So here you can see me editing a translation file, which is a YAML file. on GitHub, adding a string, I'm modifying a string, simply for demonstration purposes to show like what this would look like. Obviously, I'm taking up a couple of shortcuts here for those of you who are used to working in GitHub. This is obviously not what this would look like in a real life context, right? Like people wouldn't be working directly in GitHub. People would certainly not be creating and merging PRs by themselves, as I'm doing here. There would be a couple of layers of reviews and automated checks in between. But the goal here is really just to show I've now merged this PR. The contents of the translation files have been updated, as we can see here. The new content is there, and now I'm switching to the Linguini interface, looking at the exact same translation file in the dashboard for our central database, and we can see the content is already there with the exact same minute timestamp as it was added on GitHub. All right, so that's sort of the first side of the equation, the side that is facing our product teams. So now I'm going to shift over to the other side of the process, the side that is localization team facing or facing our external partners. So the requirements and the sort of idiosyncrasies of our product development process that I've just gone through, they kind of dictate what we need to deal with in product localization. For us, the product localization process is a standalone process. It's set quite apart from the sort of what I mentioned earlier, the flywheel localization piece, where we would have a much more, like, I guess, traditional project-based workflow, request-based workflow, whereas here it's a standalone process. It's highly automated and mostly autonomous, meaning I put no project management on the slide here, but that is in the context of moving content around, creating projects, creating tasks, creating work packages, liaising with stakeholders, liaising with linguists. That kind of project management doesn't really exist in our product localization. There's plenty of project management surrounding product localization, of course, right? Like we do work with vendors, so there's plenty of communication that needs to be managed. Billing and invoicing needs to be managed, and of course, whenever we need to change something about our infrastructure or work with product teams directly, plenty of project management there. There's not really a way to avoid that, I would say. Given all of this, there are certain requirements that our product localization has to meet. I mentioned already that we tend to have a high amount of change in our source content, right? I mentioned earlier that there are hundreds of individuals, dozens of teams who might create content or update content that requires localization, and that can happen dozens, potentially hundreds of times a day. To be quite honest, I haven't really tracked the number of changes per day, because it is a continuous thing, pretty much 24/7, because we do have product teams across a lot of different time zones. So this is pretty much an ongoing process. Almost at all times. We do get some breaks on the weekends, of course. Another thing that comes with this is that there are sometimes quite significant volume spikes that we have to deal with. If something big is going into the translation database and into the central database, and a major new initiative, for example, is being added, or content for a major new initiative is being added, we might see quite the big spike the next morning. We don't always have the best sort of look ahead as to what's coming. Again, this is very much by design, because our product teams are operating very independently of one another. For the most part, they do let us know, like, hey, there's a big influx of content coming, but every now and then something does slip through the cracks. And that is also something that we will have to be able to deal with in our process. Another major requirement is a short turnaround time. Obviously, we don't want product localization to be any sort of bottleneck or impediment for the overall development process. And because we are working in an environment where there's where there's a lot of iteration happening, where changes are meant to be deployed very quickly, as quickly as possible, we aim for the shortest turnaround times possible. Generally speaking, we would like to keep it under 2 business days at all times. Ideally, a lot shorter than that. We are also always aiming for a simultaneous release across all of our supported languages. So any feature, any app, any product that we release should be available in all supported languages from day one. That also goes for features that might be limited to specific markets or specific countries at first. But even if a feature is, for example, released only in the US for the time being, we still want to make sure that it's available across all of the languages, because we do, of course, have customers in the US who use Hubspot in different languages. So with all of that, continuous localization is an absolute must for us. There is no other way that any of this could be handled, at least not if we want to meet the requirements outlined here. If we can move to the next slide. So speaking of the other side of the process, we've seen the product-facing side of the process, where all of the different teams can connect their content sources to a central database, or in the case of GitHub, we do have a central service working that monitors GitHub for translation or source content changes. And on the other side of that, the moment that content is stored in the central database, it is then also relayed to our translation management system, Transifex. And for that, we do use a sort of a push infrastructure. Whenever new content is added to the central database, it is automatically relayed to Transifex. And as translations are done or completed in Transifex, we use the webhooks from Transifex to make sure that the translations are funneled back into the database, and then from there, they're relayed to their respective origin systems. There's another short video here that kind of shows this process in action. This is the continuation of the previous video, and you can see me here in Transifex looking up the resource that I had updated on GitHub before. And as we move into the translation interface, well, number one, we can see like the timestamp for updating matches the exact same time that we saw on GitHub and in Linguini, and we can see the updated content is already there, with the latest source update having happened less than a minute ago. So this is pretty much as real time as you can possibly make it. All right, I'm adding a couple of dummy translations here, and then I'm going to be moving back into the Linguini dashboard, just to show that once I've refreshed it, the German translation in this case, which is what I was working on, is already registered as fully translated, because all of this content has already been synced back. Here I'm showing like what the content looks like once it finds its way back to GitHub. I'm using a different example here just because it's a way more, it's a way bigger pull request that has been opened. Basically, the moment that we have the content translated in the central database, it gets relayed to GitHub, where a pull request is being opened automatically, and all of the translation changes that have been registered since the last time the translations were updated on GitHub will be added as commits to this pull request. As you can see, in this case, there's like 270 commits. That pull request was open for quite a while. So not all of them are going to be this extensive. Not all of them are going to have like single string changes added as a single commit, as you can see in the example here. But hopefully that kind of just serves to illustrate what this process looks like, and that none of this required, the only human interaction required here were at the very beginning, updating the source on the translation side, and that's pretty much it. We can move to the next slide. So none of our setup is, I want to say, like particularly complicated or something that is very much out of the ordinary, right? Like all of this is fairly established are fairly established processes. But nonetheless, it all has to come together. For us, all of this is about enabling the most streamlined, the smoothest possible continuous localization process. Again, very much with our development teams as sort of our customers. And in order to be able to do that, there's of course like a couple of systems requirements that are absolute must-haves for us. If we couldn't automate the content transfer and the content monitoring, there's no way to build a process like this. We are highly reliant on our systems being customizable, which, as already mentioned, is something that we tend to do a lot at Hubspot anyway. So we have built a fair number of sort of ancillary systems that interact with the product localization process. For example, for sending notifications to stakeholders, for sending or requesting translation review or requesting deploy, right? Like if a translator, for example, has affected a crucial change in a translation, they can send a request to the respective product team for the updated translation to be taken live as soon as possible. Possibly the biggest piece, well, I'd say automating the content transfer is the biggest piece, but the translation queue for me is kind of the next big piece that allows our workflow to work as it does. There's a threshold when you have a lot of like high frequency source content updates, source content changes. There's a threshold there where any sort of like task-based or project-based or like work package-based workflow becomes rather cumbersome. And I would argue we are way past that threshold. So for us, it makes a lot of sense to have a translation queue rather than a package-based flow, even if you're automating the creation of tasks, tickets, projects. For the linguists working on the content, it still creates a lot of overhead. Having to click through 200 micro tasks, and one has 5 words, the next one has a sentence, the next one has 10 words, and then there's maybe a full paragraph in one task. But it still takes a lot of overhead and like just makes the process much more cumbersome if all of these are individual distinct work packages. So for us, using a pooled translation queue has like massive benefits that allow us to forego this sort of package-based flow. Of course, we do want to take advantage of the regular benefits that a dedicated translation environment offers, right? Like we want to make sure to use automated QA checks. We want to leverage TM wherever possible. We want to leverage machine translation. Query management is a very big piece for us, just because we are working with external partners for our product localization, and I will be totally honest, we don't always manage to provide them with the appropriate amount of context for our source content, and some of it requires a fairly in-depth knowledge of our product, of our systems. So being able to respond quickly to linguist and linguistic queries is a core piece of our product localization workflow, and something that we pride ourselves on, in the sense that, number one, linguists gets to interact directly with our subject matter experts. So there's, again, no sort of game of telephone through 2 or 3 project managers going from client to customer and back to client. Sorry, from vendor to customer and back to vendor. And generally speaking, most of our queries are resolved within less than 1 day. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. The final piece that I would want to call out when it comes to system requirements for continuous localization is a robust reporting infrastructure, because we do, of course, want to be able to monitor the process in as close to real time as we can manage, especially in our case, given the aforementioned fluctuations in volume. We want to be able to monitor volumes and costs as closely as possible. So that we can, for example, let our finance department know what's going to be coming down the pike for the month. All right, and with that, the summary sort of is, this is not a particularly fancy setup. but everything has to come together. Everything has to work together. And for us, it's all about facilitating a streamlined process that delivers good quality with low turnaround times, and that enables our product teams to interact seamlessly and effortlessly with localization as a function, as a process in our overall product development. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jacob, who's going to dive into some more details on continuous localization.
Thanks, Dirk. That was a great look at how HubSpot is handling localization at scale. Now, I would like to share some key best practices we've seen across the industry and show how Transifex's platform can help teams like yours manage continuous localization efficiently, collaborate across remote teams, and stay ahead of global content needs. So let's dive into something I feel really passionate about, which is continuous localization. Continuous localization is not a nice to have. It's a must-have if you're building software that reaches an audience that expands across the globe. So if your company has ever thought we are going global, then I'm sure localization has crossed your mind. But here's the key. At Transifex, we've always believed localization isn't a side project. It's core to your product strategy. When you make continuous localization a part of your day-to-day operations, you're not just ticking boxes. You're accelerating your entry into global markets and, more importantly, optimizing your revenue streams. I've seen this firsthand in my role with the customer success team. I can't tell you how many times companies treated localization as an afterthought, only to hit frustrating delays when they tried to roll out new product updates in key markets. The resources weren't there, the setup wasn't efficient, and as a result, they missed opportunities. But here's the difference with companies that take a proactive approach, like Hubspot, for example. When you integrate localization directly into your CI/CD pipeline, you can launch products in multiple regions simultaneously with almost no friction. It's a huge advantage that pays dividends down the line. The key takeaway here is that localization needs to be part of your global growth strategy from the start, with a dedicated team behind it. When you integrated it into your development pipeline right alongside your feature releases, it stops being a bottleneck and starts being a growth accelerator. And at Transifex, we make that integration seamless. We help you integrate with tools like GitHub, Zendesk, Contentful, and even Figma, meaning every time you push a new feature or update, the localized content is updated across all your target languages automatically. So you're not stuck waiting for the next localization sprint or scrambling with spreadsheets and email chains. Localization becomes part of your agile development process. Imagine rolling out a new feature in 5 countries at once, and all the languages are ready in real time. That's the power of continuous localization. And we've seen clients reduce their time to market by 40% just by integrating continuous localization into their CI/CD workflows. And that kind of speed can give you a real competitive edge. All right, so once you've got a dedicated team and continuous localization integrated into your pipeline, the next thing you will want to focus on is budgeting. Let's face it, implementing a strong localization strategy does require an investment. But the key is understanding that it's an investment in expansion. So opening up new markets and reaching audiences that directly impact your bottom line. Now, how much you will need to invest really depends on a couple of things. The volume of content you're localizing and the number of target languages you want to support. The larger your scope, the more you will need to budget for. But don't worry, there are different approaches to make this work within your budget, and AI plays a huge role in making it more cost effective. So if we break it down, the first thing you need to figure out is the size of your source content. So how many source words you want to localize. Then determine how many languages you want to localize into. And that's your word count. These 2 factors set the foundation for your budget. Now, as a next step, once you know your needed word count, there are a few options for how you can handle the translation, depending on your priorities, whether it's quality, speed, or cost. Each method has different budget implications. So let's take a look at each one of them. First of all, fully human translation. This is the traditional approach. You're working with professional translators and language service providers to handle both the translation and the review process. The pros, you're getting the highest possible quality since human translators bring a deep understanding of context, tone, and nuance, which can be critical for certain industries or content types. The cons, it's the slowest and most expensive method compared to all others, especially if you have high volume content and multiple languages. The cost and time can increase quickly. The second method, MTP, machine translation and human post-editing. This is where things start to get more efficient. So with MTPE, you use machine translation to handle the bulk of the work, and then human translators step in to fine-tune and review the results. So as a quick note on how it works, the machine does a first pass, quickly translating the content, then a human linguist reviews the translation, making corrections where necessary to ensure accuracy and quality. So it's a hybrid approach. The pros, it's faster and less expensive than fully human translation. The machine does the heavy lifting, and then human post-editing ensures that the quality isn't compromised. The cons, while it's faster, the process can still take time if you're localizing a lot of content, and there are limits to what machine translation can handle, especially with complex or nuanced text. Plus, machine translation doesn't learn from context and improves the way AI does. The next method, AIPE, this is a newer approach, and it's where things get really interesting. So AIPE stands for AI-assisted translation with human post-editing. But the difference here is that the AI learns from your context over time. It's almost like having a smart assistant that gets better the more you use it. So the AI engine leverages your industry, your target audience, translation memory, your specific content, and style guidelines, and it improves with each new translation, requiring less human intervention as it learns from your preferences. Over time, human reviews become less intensive because the AI is producing more accurate results. The pros of this method, you get faster translations, and as your context improves over time, the AI output improves as well. After a while, you will need less human involvement, which reduces costs. So it's a scalable approach that works especially well for companies with ongoing localization needs. The cons, initially, you will still need humans to review the AI's output, and there is some setup required to configure the AI properly. But once it's up and running, it's highly efficient. And then the future dream, a fully AI approach. Now, this is where we all want to get to eventually, a fully AI-driven localization process from source content to production across multiple languages without any human involvement. So in a fully AI-driven system, the entire process of translation, editing, and even contextual adjustments would be handled by AI with zero need for human input. It's still a work in progress, but the potential is obviously huge. The pros here, this would be the ultimate in speed and cost efficiency. You could localize high volumes of content across multiple languages instantly. The cons, we are not quite there yet. While AI is improving, a fully end-to-end AI localization system that requires no human oversight isn't quite feasible for all types of content just yet. But we're making strides in that direction. So you might wonder, what's the right choice for you? It all comes down to your content, the markets you're targeting, and the balance you want between cost, speed, and quality. The more you integrate AI into your localization process, the more efficient and scalable it becomes, allowing you to localize more within your budget. In fact, we've seen clients cut their localization costs by up to 30% when moving from a fully human process to MTPE or AIP without sacrificing quality. That's the kind of flexibility AI brings to the table. And another real-life example to showcase how translation memory and Transifex AI combined gave a huge advantage to one of our clients. So client X, we won't name them for obvious reasons, paid 8 cents per word to their language service provider. If they hadn't used translation memory at all, the translation cost for 1 year would have been around $295K. Because they leveraged translation memory fill-up, they were actually able to cut costs by 64%. Now, after implementing Transifex AI and human post-editing into their workflows, the costs went down by 75% without jeopardizing quality, since humans are still in the loop. And though we are not there yet, if they would remove human review completely, the cost goes even down by 90%. And I know we're mainly highlighting cost savings here. However, it's not only about those. We are aware that most companies keep content unlocalized because of the high translation cost barrier. So imagine how much more of this content you can unblock and localize through AI, through the AI pipeline, basically, with the same or lower budget. Great, so now that we've covered budgeting, let's talk about something just as important, which is ease of use. If your developers can't work with it, or if it slows down your operations, it's going to end up costing you time and money. So the goal here is simple: make localization easier for your entire team, whether they are developers or content managers. And this sometimes goes beyond features. It's about having a tool that not only supports your existing tech stack, but also allows your team to get on board quickly and efficiently. The right solution should fit seamlessly into your current workflows without requiring complex workarounds or additional learning curves. We've seen how this decision affects teams, and therefore Transifex is designed for easy integration through robust APIs, allowing you to customize workflows exactly as you need. Whether your team works with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, or other development tools, our API-driven architecture means you can operate core localization features directly from your existing tools without needing to interact with the platform's UI. And this enables your devs to fully automate localization tasks, keeping everything synchronized in real time while maintaining complete control. Our Transifex native project type is just another example of seamless and continuous localization. You can directly push and pull localization content without the need for files. Transifex native releases new codes to your application while running localization work in parallel, perfectly matching the current CI/CD development flow. So no need for developers to deploy new codes just for localization purposes. No worries about localization files and handling of translation fixes. It's an over-the-air approach compared to the traditional file-based flow we also support, where you typically upload a source file, perform translations inside Transifex, download the translation files, and deploy them to your application through your code. And here's where it gets really interesting. We've designed our API in such a way that it exposes most of the functionality of the UI. So if your developers prefer to stay out of the UI entirely, they can still control all the core features through the API. This means they can build custom automations, they can manage workflows, and operate the platform without ever touching the UI. And this approach makes scaling much easier and ensures that your localization processes are as flexible and developer-friendly as possible. And of course, something that developers really appreciate, we've worked a lot on providing solid documentation that makes integrating with the API a hassle-free experience. So whether your team is new to localization or experienced in complex workflows, they can get up and running real quickly. All right, hopefully you're still with me here as we move on to the third, and at least for now, final component for successful continuous localization, and that is context, collaboration, and alignment across everyone who will take part in your localization strategy. Localization isn't just about translating words. It's about aligning teams from marketing to development to product so that everyone works together smoothly. And it's very common that in localization, multiple departments will need to be involved, and it's crucial to align these teams to create an efficient process. Different departments often have different localization needs. You might have marketing teams that may focus on brand voice and how localized content resonates with the audience, while product teams will need to make sure the technical terminology is accurate and works within the UI. And development teams are responsible for implementing the localized content into your product seamlessly, etc., etc. So it's really important to define upfront which departments will participate in your localization strategy, how many people will get involved, what's important for each team. Setting up a process that fits the needs of all these stakeholders ensures that localization doesn't become bottleneck, but rather an integrated part of your overall workflow. And of course, communication is at the heart of any successful localization strategy, especially when multiple teams are involved. You need a platform that doesn't just handle translation, but also manages the workflow and communication between teams. And here's a practical example. Rather than sending out a dozen of emails to ask who will create the source content or handle specific assets, the platform allows you to assign these tasks to the right people, whether it's development, product, or translation team. Automated notifications keep everyone informed when tasks are complete, or when new translations are ready for review. However, when you are localizing content, it's not enough to just translate the words. Your translators need context. They need to understand where the content will be used, who the audience is, and what the message needs to convey. And to do that effectively, your platform has to support context-enabling tools that make the process clearer and more efficient. This includes screenshots, because as you know, allowing translators to see exactly where the translations will appear and leveraging context around strings helps ensure that the content is not just accurate, but also fits visually, whether it's UI text or a marketing banner. Glossaries and translation instructions, setting up clear glossaries and translation guidelines helps ensure consistency across all translated content, which is the key when working with across multiple markets. Translation checks, those can catch potential issues before they even reach the review stage, like a missing variable, a link, an HTML tag, or a missing glossary term. And of course, collaboration features on different levels, like announcements on an org and project level, discussions on a team level, messages on an individual level, and comments on a string level. Your translators and reviewers need to collaborate with each other and with other teams, discuss context, clarify terminology, and all within the platform itself. So no more scattered email threads or external chats. And there is much more, but in essence, these things make up a solid foundation for a successful strategy when getting into continuous localization. So I hope you found this interesting enough to keep you all hyped for what's coming next. So now let's talk about two letters that are really transforming the localization space: AI. We've touched on it a bit earlier, but AI is rapidly evolving and becoming a key player in how companies manage their global content. And I think we all agree that we're just scratching the surface of what it can do. So, Dirk, let me ask you, how do you think AI will impact the localization space?
Right. Yeah, as you said, it's probably not just the localization space that AI is going to be massively changing, but a lot of other spaces as well this time around. I'm saying this time around because we have kind of gone through that cycle already when neural machine translation came onto the scene back in 2016. So everyone in localization has kind of already seen the discussions that a lot of other people are having nowadays. In regards to AI, first of all, I have to give the disclaimer that I'm coming at this from the perspective of an enterprise buyer, right? Like I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who is going to be responsible for the deployment, the integration, and the workflow development that for workflows that should include AI. So I'm not an end user of it in the sense that a linguist might be. And generally speaking, my thoughts on AI are very much subject to change, as AI itself is subject to change. And depending on the type of AI and the use case that we're talking about, my thoughts will probably differ. But yeah, first things first, like if we're talking about AI in the sense of using it for machine translation, well, like the machine translation use case is obviously here to stay, obviously, right? Like demand is through the roof, and a solid ecosystem has developed over the past years, and before that even. So that use case is definitely going to be here to stay. And AI, the current wave of AI, the new technology in the form of LLMs, has definitely the possibility to improve this use case even further. In fact, that's what we're currently seeing across the quality benchmarks. But that's not, I guess that's not the wow factor that we're looking for when we're talking about AI. There are a bunch of different use cases with generative AI that are currently at different stages of maturity, automated post-editing, automated quality estimation, and so on. And I think it is important to, number one, evaluate each of these use cases individually. The current wave of AI has has a weird like new aspect to it, in the sense that LLMs they're not general purpose technologies, but they're certainly technology that seems to have broader applicability than a very narrow focused machine translation system. And this is what kind of makes it very tricky for both buyers as well as providers to kind of figure out where best to employ them, where the time might not have come yet, and potentially where an entire use case that people are experimenting with may not even pan out in the end, right? Like that's certainly given the sort of experimental stage that we're in at the moment, that is certainly a possibility. For me, also a big thing to keep in mind from again, deployment integration perspective are the economics, and the economics behind generative AI are certainly something to keep in mind. Whereas the machine translation space is quite established, generative AI, there's still a lot of question marks up in the air as far as the economics go. Right now, the providers of LLMs are rushing to create bigger and better models, which is an extremely cost-intensive process. Most of the offerings that are on the market are currently priced for growth, which is probably not going to last indefinitely. So those are just some things to keep in mind if you are an end user, for example, or a customer who are looking to implement these services in your localization workflows. Maybe some thoughts here, like both for providers and for end users. For providers, like, well, you guys at Transifex are in the unenviable position to have to make the potential use cases that the technology has, to make those concrete for your customers. And we're going to see a bit more about like how Transifex is approaching this in a sec. But it's very important there to focus on creating something tangible for the end user, right? Like this is really for me the big thing, that if AI or like generative AI LLMs are positioned as like, here is the latest iteration of machine translation, that is going to be a very different impact than saying like, hey, we have these new systems that allow you to do X, Y, and Z, be that automatic post editing or automatic quality estimation, right? And then on the flip side, for the end users, for the customers, one thing that I myself would say I have probably a slightly conservative approach to this, simply because I'm very aware of the cost of switching, the cost of migration, the cost of implementing a new technology in a workflow. And when we're talking about the difference between experimenting with something and like looking at the headlines that the new technology generates, as opposed to putting a new technology into a potentially quite entrenched business process, those are going to be two very different things, two very different timelines. So my general stance there is keep an open mind, keep up to date, definitely experiment in the capacity that you can. Not everyone will have that luxury, but wait until you have something real before you, rather than rushing to adoption. At least that would be my personal recommendation. But yeah, it is an interesting time to be working in the localization space. There's certainly going to be a lot more coming down the pike. And yeah, for the moment, I guess try your best to enjoy the ride.
Great insights, Dirk. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, to build on what you've just mentioned, we are already seeing some pretty significant shifts with AI. Transifex has a long history in localization and helping technology teams get their products to global markets. AI just presented an enormous opportunity for us to help our customers get 100% control of their localization. But we needed to execute it in a manner that's future-proof, not only for us, but also for the users who choose Transifex as their localization partner. One of the most exciting developments from our end is the combination of our AI-powered translation and our proprietary Transifex Quality Index, TQI. These two tools together are changing the way businesses manage global content. So let's talk about Transifex AI first. And using this graph, I also wanted to visually share with you why this can be uniquely scalable for any localization team. So at its core, Transifex AI doesn't just translate. It learns from your content and context. It can automatically pick up on your terminology, tone, and brand style, producing more accurate translations and keep learning further with every project. The AI adapts as it encounters more of your content, which means it's constantly improving and reducing the amount of manual post-editing needed. Now, looking at the graph on this slide, you will see how Transifex AI interacts with different language models, and this is where the power really comes through. The AI selects the best possible translation output by cross-referencing multiple top models, including industry-specific ones, and feeding that into your localization process. The result, you get high-quality, context-aware, fit-for-purpose translations faster and with fewer human touch points. And not only that, but the way this is architectured ensures that you remain relevant no matter the shift in technology over time. But the real ace in the hole comes when we pair Transifex AI with a Transifex Quality Index. The TQI is an automated tool that scores AI-generated translations in real time. And you can see on the slide that TQI breaks down the quality of translations across several key dimensions like translation complexity, quality assurance, and quality estimation. These are weighted based on your specific requirements, ensuring the AI's output isn't just fast, but meets the highest localization standards. As we scale localization efforts across multiple regions and languages, maintaining high quality standards while keeping up with the pace of development can be certainly tough. But with Transifex AI and TQI working together, you can significantly reduce the time spent on manual reviews while still ensuring your translations meet the quality bar you set. So in a nutshell, here's how it works. Transifex AI translates your content, learning as it goes. TQI scores the translation, showing you which strings are considered fit for purpose, production ready, and which require human post-editing. Soon enough, TQI will automatically review the translation and provide real-time feedback on its quality, flagging any issues related to terminology, context, or even design. And as a final step, you can create a review task for strings with a TQI score lower than 0.85 and have only those reviewed by your linguists. And very soon, there will be the option to push high-quality translations to production automatically, while lower-scoring translations will be flagged for human review. So this means your team doesn't have to manually review every translation. TQI filters out what needs attention and what's ready to go live. And the result? Faster localization, fewer barriers, and more content localized within the same budget and without sacrificing quality. So we've covered a lot of ground, from Hubspot's localization journey to how AI is shaping the future of this space. And now we'd love to hear from you. So we're going to move into our Q&A session. Feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, and we'll get through as many as possible. I know we're very close to time, so I hope you can stay with us for a few more minutes. So we're going to move into the Q&A session. And don't worry if we don't get to your question after the webinar. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of today's session, as well as a chance to connect with our team for any additional questions or details you would like to dive into. So with that, let's open it up for your questions.
All right, I see one here. If you want me to take this.
Sure.
So Toby asks, do you envisage that Gen AI will allow local marketers, for example, to generate better and more appropriate content for their market than any AI-driven translation solution? And additionally, given the ongoing cycle of outsourcing versus insourcing, centralizing versus decentralizing, would this effectively kill the centralized localization management model? Okay, that question deserves a very long answer. I'm going to try to keep it short. Do I envisage this? No, I'm not ruling it out, but I don't see that happening, at least for the moment. Is the technology technically capable of delivering this capability? Yes. But to generate better and more appropriate content for any given market, that requires a specificity of that content and a level of like fine tuning for the models that you use that I think would be quite tricky to reach at this point. Obviously, like if we're talking about generating content and then marketers going in and making sure that the content is appropriate for their given market, that is an option, right? Like, but that is I want to say threat to centralized localization management or generally the translation approach that already exists, right? Like there's plenty of companies who rather than localizing content would go into native content creation for individual markets. And at that point, generative AI could certainly be a force multiplier for generating the content. But you, at least for the moment, the human element would be as involved and I would say as costly, if not more, than translating said content. So I'm not ruling it out that we will see some major shifts here, but so far from what I've seen from other companies, any attempt to kind of deploy generative AI at wide scale to create content will typically result in content that is either not performing as well as it should, or currently requires an amount of human review and editing that the local marketers probably don't want to take on themselves. They have more than enough on their plates typically.
And if I can comment on this, our belief is that an AI-driven translation solution will provide better content than a generic generative AI model. And this is because a proper AI translation platform will leverage existing content, style guides, etc., to transcreate more appropriate, targeted, and high-quality content. And if done correctly, we see the AI translation platform as being critical to a centralized localization management model for those same reasons. Yeah, I guess localization is so much more than literal translation that comes from MT or a natively prompted generative AI model, where an AI TMS can not only provide consistent context, but also can scale the localization pipeline through various source system integrations. Additionally, having a centralized localization process that leverages an AI TMS does not lock you into a single generative AI model, but rather takes advantage of all the investment going into various LLMs and selects the best model based on performance. I see another question. What's the localization content where Transifex AI provides the best results? All right. In general, Transifex AI performs best with content that has context. This might be short strings in software applications where context is provided from screenshots and other metadata, or longer strings from content like marketing blog posts, where surrounding strings allow Transifex AI to detect brand voice and glossary terms.
There's one more question here. How and how much does Hubspot leverage a machine translation or AI translation in its product localization? Right now, not all that much. It can be quite challenging content for machine translation to handle. But we're experimenting with it, and where we do employ it, it is very targeted, either like based on the specific content that lends itself to be to machine translation. So kind of to go into what Jacob just mentioned, for example, if we have a big long strings that have a lot of context provided in and of themselves, that's typically an area where we would try to at least experiment with using machine translation. And then also based on language, simply because we sort of have, like, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, there are like different priority tiers, so to speak, for languages, and some of the long tail languages we may use we may want to use machine translation or AI translation for those languages.
All right, and I see another question. What considerations do you hear customers taking into account when deciding what content is production ready? All right, so many of our customers first evaluate the purpose of the content they're translating. So is this content for a marketing blog or for legal terms of service? You might handle these differently, but we had a client recently express a review on the use of AI as essentially, quotes here, not letting perfect be the enemy of ready to publish. And the great thing about TQI is that it accurately determines what's ready to publish and provides the metadata to prove it.
There's a question here whether AI translation is available for Indian languages.
I know that Transifex AI supports over 100 languages. I'm pretty much certain that it supports Indian, but I'm just checking to provide an accurate answer here.
Well, I mean, there's a plethora of Indian languages, so I guess you have to pick and choose.
Yes. Yes, multiple dialects. There is a full list on our website, so we can definitely share with the user who asked this question the link to our help center where you can see exactly the languages and locales that Transifex AI supports. All right, I know we are over time here, so thank you all for staying with us. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope we provided some insights into streamlining software localization for global impact and the role AI plays and will continue to play in the industry. Finally, special thanks to Dirk Rune from Hubspot, who honored us with his presence today. Thanks a lot, Dirk.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone, for attending. And yeah, see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.